So here is the blue-red aggro deck, kind of suicide blue. It's a pretty new deck to Modern. It's been doing well online recently. Handful of creatures. Then we've got some pump spells, essentially similar in many ways to the Infect or Death Shadow decks that try to win out of nowhere almost. The mana base is a bunch of different blue-red lands. Nothing too fancy there. Some fetches, steam vents, and there's also 4 Spire Bluff Canal. So it's nice to see Spire Bluff Canal seeing play in Modern as a 4 of. And most of the cards are just 1 and 2 mana cards because this deck can win pretty easily as early as turn 3. And you can win on turn 2 even, but that's much more difficult. So we've got some essentially 0 mana spells, even though they are 1 mana. So Mutagenic Growth, we can't actually hardcast it in the deck. So it's just a 0 mana +2/+2. You take 2 for it, but you want just a bunch of cheap instants and sorceries. This is one of them. There is a reasonable amount of the time when Mutagenic Growth will come out after board, when the opponent is boarding in more removal, or you just have other cards you want to bring in. But the game 1 plan of just killing your opponent as fast as possible, Mutagenic Growth is great for. So we've got our one mana creature here, which is Monastery Swiftspear. And Swiftspear can get out of hand for sure. There's a bunch of instants and sorceries in the deck. So this deck, it plays a bunch of Prowess-like creatures or creatures that benefit from casting these instants and sorceries in some ways. And Monastery Swiftspear is just the best 1-drop for this deck. For Lightning Bolt, Lightning Bolt is just a very solid card. It's also 1 mana. It's the only removal spell in the deck. Faithless Looting helps smooth out your draws. It's a 2 of. I definitely don't like more, but having 2 of it is pretty nice. And then 1 Sleight of Hand. It's kind of a weird singleton after the Serum Visions, but it's kind of like smoothing out your draws. Finding the exact card you need to combo kill your opponent is pretty important. And Serum Visions is just the best 1 mana cantrip in Modern. Being able to scry 2 and go deep into your deck to find the exact card you need. I'll keep most hands with the Visions. There's 4 probes, so that's the other 0 mana card. You can hardcast probe, but a lot of times you just want to cast it for 0 and maximize the turn when you're casting it. You don't necessarily just want to fire it off, though, on turn 1. You want to wait to get some more value for casting it when you do decide to cast the probe. So that's a lot of 1 mana cards. There's also a bunch of 2 mana cards here. So there's 2 copies of Apostle's Blessing. Now, I should say Apostle's Blessing, while it's in the 2 mana slot, it's also a 1 mana card, because we're not playing any white mana. So it's similar to Mutagenic Growth in many ways. It's just there. We're willing to take the 2 damage, or pay the 2 life, I should say. And then it's 1 mana. It can protect our creatures. It can help get our creatures through. And generally you want to be casting it the turn you are trying to go for the win, or protecting a creature from an opposing removal spell. So there's 4 Thing in the Ice. So we got some pretty powerful 2 mana creatures here that can win the game on their own. Thing in the Ice is one of them. So flipping a Thing in the Ice is actually not very difficult. If we play Thing in the Ice on 2, it's pretty likely we're going to have 4 instants and sorceries we can get to in order to flip it. Then sometimes you want to fire a Battle Rage on it or something of that nature, and you're able to win right away. Kiln Fiend is the other super powerful 2-drop. It just gets so big so easily. As a 2-mana 1/2, it may not seem that threatening, but it really, really is. It's great with Temur Battle Rage. You can win with just a few spells. Say you play a turn 2 Kiln Fiend, then you go, say, a Probe, and then a Mutagenic Growth, and then a Battle Rage, and all of a sudden, your Kiln Fiend is attacking your opponent for lethal damage. So, pretty crazy card. And I'm looking to see more of it in Modern for sure. Battle Rage is mostly the way we kill our opponent in these sequences that we just combo kill our opponent out of nowhere for like 20 damage. The double strike and trample is definitely very relevant, and so that's why there are the full 4, even though sometimes you draw multiples and you don't really need more than 1. And then there's 4 copies of Manamorphose. Manamorphose is basically just a cantrip here that's an instant, which is what this deck is looking for. It's playing a bunch of cantrips so as to constantly have instants and sorceries to cast for these creatures. You just really need to get one of these powerful creatures into play, back it up with a bunch of non-creature spells, and then win. And then there's 2 copies of Bedlam Reveler. Bedlam Reveler is nice whenever the game starts to become a little bit more attrition-based, and you can draw cards to gas back up with it. There's only 2 copies because you never want multiples, since you have to discard one to the other one if you do draw multiples. But the main deck is pretty solid. There's not a ton of wiggle room here. Most of the cards are definitely necessary in order to make the strategy as strong as it is. In the sideboard, there's more room for picking and choosing what matchups to focus on. So the Grafdigger's Cage is there for Dredge, and also for the Collected Company and Court of Calling decks. Shattering Spree is primarily for Affinity. There's some other artifact-based decks too, like Lantern Control. Vapor Snag comes in some of the other creature matchups similar to this deck, or like Infect, where having a way to bounce an opposing creature could be actually game-winning. It's not a card you just board in, though, against any deck with creatures by any means. Then we have basically our protection counter spells. I don't like to play counters in the main deck because they don't work all that well with Prowess creatures, because you want to be acting first by playing your instants and sorceries when you want to play them, and these counters you have to play on your opponent's timetable. But after board, having 1-mana counters is pretty nice. So we've got Dispel. Most players probably know about Dispel at this point and how it's a strong sideboard option. The other counter here, though, is Swan Song. So Swan Song is actually more versatile because it can not only counter instants but also enchantments and sorceries. And the 2/2 Flying Bird, remember that our opponent gets after this card is cast. Remember that we are playing 4th Thing in the Ice. So we can just bounce the bird. It's not normally that important, but it is definitely something that can come up where the 2/2 bird enters the battlefield and can start attacking you. We've got a couple value creatures here. So the Young Pyromancer and the 3rd Bedlam Reveler, they come in the slower matchups where you're facing more removal after sideboard. So you want more threats, and you want to be able to dig through your deck more easily. So there's 1 Young Pyromancer and 1 Bedlam Reveler. And then we've got 3 copies of Blood Moon. So this deck is straight blue and red. Blood Moon is a card that's can just shut down decks completely. It's a game warping card, and that's why there's 3 of them in the board. There's certainly matchups where you don't want it, but when it does come in, it's incredibly important. So this is the blue-red suicide deck. Essentially, it's a newcomer on the block, but it's putting up some big results. So I expect to see more of it moving forward.